Alexander Kotlarov. I'm from Juneau, Alaska. I just like to share some research that I have that I've just completed. My talk is a review of some of the community programs that they have in Alaska. So just really quickly, in '76, the exclusive economic zone was extended out, and very quickly the fleet in Alaska expanded. Expanded, and they could catch the whole catch very quickly. The result of this, what happened to the whole system was that the management of the fisheries, they had a really difficult time managing it. They had over-harvest, they had low value, they reduced economics of the whole fishery. And you could see the number of days as the fish had got down to the whole fleet was being fished in a couple of days. So what they did, of course, you know the story of the Alaska IFQ fishery. They rationalized the fishery and they set it up, but they wanted to have a much better system than some of the other groups. So they called in some experts. They called in people from New Zealand, people from Canada, and they tried to put some social economic goals into the program. And some of the goals were to try to really keep the fisheries a fisherman's fishery. They really worked on trying to do that, and they were worried about some of the problems that they've heard from other fisheries. So some of the things they came up with is owner on board requirements, caps, so a person couldn't overfish the thing, transfer restrictions, vessel size and classes. What they really tried to do is they tried to put a footprint of every single community how it was. So if like Angoon had so many vessels that were this size and so many vessels that were this size, they would allocate the quota, and they had to keep that quota in that area. And they were trying to do this to try to keep the footprint of this whole system. And so what you saw was, as expected outcomes, you had safety in sea, much higher. They had improved fish quality, higher profits, extended season, sable fish increase. Everything was looking really good. And it was a success program. They were kind of, basically the market of the halibut, and everything was much more profitable for the fishermen, and everything was very well. But there was a couple problems that they didn't see. One was the hired master. This was a small clause that was put in there. Initialies were allowed to have, they could do a hired master program, and this was greatly overutilized, and it gave an unfair advantage to initialies. They could use their allocations to leverage to buy more quota, and it became an unfair advantage to new people, and it raised the prices of the quotas and everything. And another thing, and this was kind of the other thing was that there was a study done quite early in 2000. You could see that a lot of the quota was moving out of the small rural areas. And we did a number of analysis, and one analysis looked at 46 small communities in the lower part of Alaska and the Gulf and southeastern Alaska. And they lost a lot of their quota over time, and it was like over 50–60%. And this kind of happened at the same time that the salmon dropped. So it's kind of it hit the communities at the same time when the fish farm exploded, and so a lot of the plants were closing in these small communities, and then they lost their IFQ. It was a really bad situation. So the council decided to come up with a program, and it was called the Community Quota Entity Program. And this this allowed communities to go out and start a nonprofit organization, and then under the CQE program, they could put together a proposal, and after filling out a lot of paperwork, they could go out and buy quota, and they could be owned by the community, and then the community would give it to the people that would fish. So it would actually be a step in a different direction from what it was, where before we could not allow any other person, only a person could own it, but this would allow the community to do it. And unfortunately, after 14 years, it was like 3 communities was able to purchase quota, and it wasn't very successful at all. So in 2008, the council tried to help them again, and they offered these small communities free charter halibut permits and free cod permits. So certain communities would have certain permits that would allow them to go out and do it. And there's been a few rural communities that have gotten these and used it in one community, but out of 46 communities, there's only 5 communities that have been able to purchase quota. And only one of them used the charter permits to generate income to do it. And there's a number of reasons why this happened, but the biggest reason is the price of quota is $70 a pound in some areas, and it's not economical to buy it. But there's also a huge amount of paperwork, and but basically the program did not do what they wanted to do to help these small communities, and even with these extra programs that they put together. So, and that one thing that is really helpful when you look at some of these small communities, and it's a report that we did, is you go back and you look at the history of what these small communities had before. So I did an analysis of all 46 communities, and I looked at before or at 1995 when they had quota. So the amount of quota share that was owned in these small communities, and the amount of quota share that lands in these small communities. And then you look at the drop in every single community. It goes from, so like even a small town like Angoon that has a very small population, they had over $200,000 in sales, and they had like 6 or 7 vessels fishing. And within 4 years, they had nothing, and they haven't been able to get back into the fishery at all. So it was a good analysis looking at every single community, but when you go back and map kind of what they had before and what they have now, it paints a really good picture, because then you can go to the community and say, okay, this is kind of what you guys were doing 15 years ago, and now your fleet is down to this. It kind of paints a good picture. So the Alaska program has been modified. I mean, they've done a number of amendments to try to fix things with this small community program, and they've made attempts to do it, but when they put this law together, maybe they should have done it in the very beginning to think about these small communities before this happened. But the program is continuously being modified, and it is something that communities need to come together and explain to them what they need to do. So just real briefly looking at 2 other quick fisheries, the Pollock fishery was on the western part of Alaska. They allocated a small percentage of their quota to these small rural communities. I think you know about the CDQ program. But this is a total different story. So they were initially given a quota, and over the last 30 years, they have generated over $1 billion in we'll have it all broken out and what they've done. But a lot of those small communities are still slightly struggling, but they have fisheries. They have a fisheries infrastructure in a lot of these areas. But so that's another program, but that was different in the sense that they've given a quota. And then the next one, these are the communities in the western part of Alaska that actually have a small amount of quota. And one of them actually just recently was able to buy one of the large processing vessels, a 300-foot vessel. So one of the CDQ has one. That's the next one. And another one is the crab fishery, the support measures. So they have an interesting program where they have there's actually 4 programs, and 2 of them aren't being used. They have a small amount of CDQ as well, but they have a super exclusive registration scheme up in Norton Sound. So there's a small king crab area up in Norton Sound where they only allow super exclusive fisheries. So any boat can go in there and fish it, but if you fish that fishery, you can't go fish the other big king crab fisheries. So none of the big boats go to that area, and so the community has been able to develop a fishery. It's a small $3 million a year fishery, but it's an example of something that would work for these small communities. So that's kind of a bright spot. So you can see this is the Bristol Bay crab. It's not a big one. Next one. So one thing, the future of the fisheries, I totally agree with the youth and how we can get into it. There's a lot of examples going around, like Maine has got an apprenticeship program. It's impossible to get into the lobster program, but they have a program for youth to get into it if you follow a set of steps. Norway's got a youth program. And then Alaska Longline Association has started an apprenticeship program, and that's helped local fishermen. And they're starting to get some movement with young people. They have a young fisherman summit in Alaska now where they get all the young people together and they talk to them about how to buy quota, what to do, and there's some very energetic people going in that system. So just Iceland, they have actually some other community programs too that have been looked at. The next one. And then Norway as well has several programs for small. So all of these fisheries nations like us have all had the same problem with these small communities being pushed out of it. And so at the end of my research, I kind of put together kind of like a roadmap for rebuilding. And I think during these difficult times, you really need to conduct outreach to the communities, but also really look at what they had in the past and develop a plan, like get everybody together. And if you get like all these communities and they start really working together and start talking about how they could do this, then you'd have a lot more power when you go talk to the political people. And then you can, well, in Alaska you can purchase quota and then identify that. So the next slide. So the Fisheries Trust is another thing, another area that the different quota people can, so it's not economical to go to a bank and ask for quota because you can't even pay off the amount of loan, but some of these fishery trusts that have been developed across America, and now there's been one developed in Sitka, has actually given an opportunity for young fishermen to get into the fishery. So these are the steps that can help community support. Just really highlight the community organization. I mean, this is the time that First Nations, fishermen, everybody has to come together and they have to look at what it is they need to do, encourage the youth to enter the fishery, help community develop goals, research other programs, try to incorporate into your thing to tell other areas that are doing it and support the local groups that are working directly with commercial fishermen. So.